Alright guys, today I'm going to show you how to draw just a basic, realistic nose with basic supplies. You don't have to buy any fancy art supplies, just a regular pencil. It's a regular eraser. And for blending our shading, we're going to use a Q-tip. If you don't have a Q-tip, you can take a tissue and you can sort of twist it like this. Alright, so to start, like the main front part of the nose, you're just going to draw a circle, go around a few times till you get the shape right. Then you're going to draw two smaller circles that are going to overlap that first circle, and those are going to be the nostrils. These 2 points right here are where the holes of the nostrils are going to be, so I'm going to go ahead and just draw two curved lines to create the shape of the nostrils, and then I'm going to connect them with a line like this. And I started to sort of draw the shape of the nostrils, but I didn't like it, so I started erasing it. And now I'm going to go over these lines and just darken them because these are going to create the edges of the nostrils. I'm just going over the lines again to make them darker. Going over this first circle we drew again. Now I'm drawing the bridge of the nose. It's going to start at the point where the circles intersect on top, and it's going to curve in and then curve back out as it goes up. So now I'm erasing some of the lines, but I'm not erasing all of the lines. Like that first circle that we drew, I need to keep that there because I'm going to need that for later. So while I'm not erasing it completely, I'm just cleaning it up. So I'm cleaning up some of the lines, and I'm only erasing a few other lines. And I'm just going over a few of the lines again, connecting the nostrils to the bridge of the nose. Alright, now I'm going to draw the philtrum below the nose. It's just a little teardrop shape. And just cleaning up the lines a little bit. Again, I'm not erasing them. I'm just lightening them up and cleaning them up a bit because I'm still going to need that circle later on. Alright, so at this point I'm starting to think about shadows. I'm starting to think about where my darkest shadows are going to be. Assuming the light is coming from sort of the top, I'm going to assume this area right underneath the bottom of the nose is going to have the darkest shadow, as well as inside the nostrils themselves. Like, not any light is going to be getting in there, so those are going to be my darkest areas. So right now I'm just focusing on thinking about where my light source is coming from, and based on where my light source is coming from, just trying to think where would my darkest shadows be. So there would also be a shadow inside the philtrum here where it dips in a little bit. It's always important to remember where your light source is coming from when you're shading. So I'd also have some dark shadows underneath the bottom edges of my nostrils down here as well. Alright, so now I'm going to start to blend the shading I just added. So shading is a process. It's basically a process of you are layering up the shadows. So you do one layer of shading, you blend it, you clean it up, you add another layer. And so it's a process. It doesn't just all happen at once. So now I'm cleaning up the edges that I blended. Just cleaning it up with an eraser. Now I'm going back in and I'm darkening up some areas of the shadow. So again, I'm just layering up and building up some of these shadows. So inside the nostril, I know it's going to be really dark, so I'm adding more dark shading in there. I'm adding more dark shading right underneath the bottom edge of the nose. Adding dark shading in this other nostril as well. Adding a little bit of dark shading in there. And adding some darker shading underneath the bottom edges of my nostrils. And again, I'm going to blend. So this is just a repetitive process where you add a layer of shading, you blend, you clean it up, you add another. Now I'm going to start to blend some of these other lines I have in here just so they look a little bit smoother. I'm just blending all these other outlines I have. Blending the top of the nose, blending the edges of the bridge of the nose. And now that I've blended, again, I'm going to clean up some of the edges with my eraser. To blend it even more, I'm using my finger to really smudge it in those areas to make it softer. So now I'm darkening up this shadow here, this little area that separates the front part of the nose from the nostrils. And in that little corner where the nostril meets the bridge of the nose, I'm making sure I add a shadow in there. Just adding a layer of shading here. And again, I'm going to blend it. Now that I've blended, I'm going to add very, very light shading at the top of the nose here. I don't want it to be too dark, so I'm being super light with my pencil. And I'm using my eraser not to erase it completely, but I'm sort of tapping my eraser on it just to lighten it up a bit without completely erasing it. So this just lightens up the area. So, and I'm going to blend that. Alright, so now I'm going to add a shadow at the bottom of the middle part of our nose, but if you notice, I'm actually leaving a little bit of white space at the very bottom there. So that's something that's called reflected light. So the shadow does not reach all the way to the bottom. There's a little bit of a halo of light down there. So that's something called reflected light that you're going to want to include in your drawings, especially if you're working with rounded objects. You just got to think about how the light is bouncing around and is reflecting in different directions. So you kind of leave a little halo of light illuminating the bottom there. So I'm blending that shading now. But again, I left that little bit of reflected light down at the bottom there. I'm going to go back in with my eraser to make sure I erase down there and make sure my reflected light is visible. I'm erasing beneath the holes of the nostrils as well. So now I'm going to add shading on the surface of the nostril around the side there, but again, I'm not going all the way to the edge. I'm leaving a tiny little area of white at the very edge for my reflected light. Now I'm going to blend that shading. So Now I'm going back with my eraser to make sure I include that reflected light on the edge, that little halo of light around the edges. Smudging it a bit more with my finger. Now that I've done some blending and smudging, I'm going to clean up a little bit with my eraser. Now I'm going to darken these corners a bit more, the corners where the nostril meets the bridge of the nose. And I'm going to darken the shadow at the bottom of the central part of our nose, again making sure I leave that reflected light at the bottom there. I'm going to darken this shadow here, still keeping the reflected light on the edges. So shading is just a process of layering and building up areas. And now I'm just darkening some of these outlines and darkening those areas that I mentioned at the beginning that should be our darkest shadows. I want to make sure I keep those the darkest, so as I go I'm going to add more shading to make sure they stay dark. And now I'm going to blend those areas I just shaded. And now that I blended, I'm going to clean up the areas with my eraser. Now I'm making the holes of the nostrils even darker, because again, those are going to be my darkest areas, and I want to make sure those look darker than the rest of the drawing. The thing about shading is you want there to be contrast, and you want there to be different types of shadows. It shouldn't all be the same shade of gray. You want darker grays, you want lighter grays, you want blacks, you want whites to have the contrast there. So now I'm just adding more layers of shading, and I'm blending, I'm smudging it with my finger. So now what I'm doing is I'm going back with my eraser and I'm creating highlights. If you end up blending and smudging too much, your whole drawing is just going to all be the same shade of gray. You need to make sure that there's still some white areas in there to create that contrast. So I'm going back in and creating these highlights where I think the light would be hitting. And I'm just darkening up some of these edges, some of these outlines. I don't think I've mentioned I have that piece of paper underneath my hand just to keep me from smudging what I've already drawn. I usually just take a piece of scratch paper and I just fold it up and I keep it under my hand. Just keeps things from smudging. Darkening up this outline. Darkening up the shadow. Making sure I darken up that corner up there. And then blending. I'm actually going to go in, that's the tissue where I took the tip of it and I sort of twisted it into a little point. And I'm cleaning it up with my eraser. So now I'm going to add the shading on the sides of the bridges of the nose. This needs to be very light and soft shading. It shouldn't be super dark, so I'm using barely any pressure with my pencil to make it really, really light. going on the other side as well. Again, very, very light pressure with the pencil. And make sure that the shading follows that curve. The bridge of the nose should curve in and then back out. Now I'm going to use the tissue again to smudge, to blend it. And I'm sort of using kind of tiny circular motions. And then at the top there, I sort of went in and just created a shadow, that arch up at the top of the bridge of the nose, sort of at the level where your eyebrows would be. It would dip in a little bit there, so there would be a shadow. Now I'm just cleaning up the edges here. So now I want to add a bit more definition to the sides of the bridge of the nose. I don't want it to be a super dark outline because that's not what it would look like in reality. So I'm just adding a bit of darker shading within that lighter shaded area. And randomly going back to the bottom of the nose and darkening that up too, I guess, because I felt like it. Alright, now I'm going to use my tissue to blend that. Now I'm accentuating that top of the bridge of the nose, that arch up there, but this shading is still really light. And then I'm accentuating the top of the bulbous part of the nose with just some really light shading, darkening up those two corners there. Now I'm blending. I'm going to go back to my Q-tip this time. And now I'm going back in and creating highlights. So again, if you've been just blending and smudging everything, it'll all turn into just the same shade of gray. And you gotta make sure there's still some white areas of your drawing to create contrast. So I'm going in and I'm creating a highlight right in the middle of the bridge of the nose. And I'm making a highlight at the top of the central bulbous part of the nose. And then I'm going to just blend the edges of that highlight just so the edges don't look so harsh, so they look like they blend in more. And now I'm going back to those areas that I said need to be the darkest, the shadow underneath the bottom of the nose, the inside of the nostrils. Just going over again to make sure those areas are dark and defined. Going in and erasing some reflected light right below the holes of the nostrils. And making sure I have that reflected light at the bottom of my nose and around the edges. Just blending things in a bit so it looks more natural. And darken up these corners again. Blend them. Adding even more shading down on these dark areas down here. Inside the philtrum, underneath the nose, inside the nostrils. blend it with my Q-tip. Just cleaning up some of the edges there where I've over blended. Making sure I'm still erasing in my highlights there. It's super important that you still have your highlights. So I'm just going back in with my eraser. I erased a little bit in the inside of my Filtrum. Alright, and that's it. So I'm gonna put the finished product up here, and you can just pause the video and just compare it and make any final changes. And thanks for watching.